I thought let's talk about Purim and the Megillah a little bit and see what comes up, because there's a lot in it. We've had a class here for a few weeks on the Megillah that really explained a lot, but just in general we will take a little bit of time about Purim first. So before we actually get into the Megillah itself, just to discuss an idea about Purim. There's an interesting set of laws that we find in the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, and the laws themselves are very odd, but where the laws are said, I think, tells us an interesting message. The laws are that there are certain things that a person is required to do, but if you do it backwards, it's as if you didn't do it. So, for instance, it says, if you read the Hallel, right, the Hallel prayer backwards, it's as if you didn't say it. So you'd say, well, of course not. You imagine you take the Hallel prayer and you say the words backwards. It's nonsense. So it says that's not what it means. It doesn't even mean you say the sentences backwards. It says, like, Hallel is, let's say, 10 paragraphs of Psalms, of Tehillim, and you say it in the order. So now you're going to take the order of the Psalms and start from the end and go back to the beginning. You're saying the words correctly, you're saying the sentences correctly, you're saying the paragraph, the actual Tehillim, correctly. You're just saying it out of order. And if you do that, it's as if you didn't do it at all. And you find it the same thing with the law with the Megillah. It says if you read the Megillah, like we have here, and we're going to do it on Purim at least 2 times, if you read the Megillah backwards, it's as if you haven't done it at all. Yes?
I read on the side that if you read it on different language than Hebrew, that it's not the same set of words, and it doesn't matter that you read it. You have exactly read it on Hebrew, otherwise...
Correct. It's like reading the Torah in that way. It has to be...
in different order.
Right. And it's just like the Torah is the same. Right? If you while the law is a little different with the Torah, but if you read the Torah in English, it's not like reading the Torah. Right?
The same as Megillah, you cannot read it in different
Right, because it has to be in the way it was written. It was written by Esther and Mordechai, and they wrote it in Hebrew, and there's very, very specific ideas within the Megillah that are only found in the Hebrew words, that you don't find it in translation. In any case, though, here it says if you read it backwards, you haven't done it, you haven't read it, right? And it says one more place, it says by the reading of the Shema. Right? Every day we're supposed to say the Shema twice a day. If you read that backwards, you also have not read the Shema. Now, again, if it was saying you read the words backwards and you're saying gibberish, of course, so that's not what it means. If you would say that you read the sentences out of order, the last sentence, and then you go backwards, so also that seems, that perhaps it won't convey the right message. But that's not it. In the case of the Shema as well, the Shema is 3 paragraphs. If you read the 3 paragraphs and you start with the 3rd paragraph and then you go to the 2nd and then the 1st, as if you didn't say it at all. And with the Megillah, you have 10 chapters, and it's as if you read the 10th and then the 9th and then the 8th, right? Going back to the 1st as if you didn't read it. And one has to wonder, first thing is, why would you think such a thing, and why only in these 3 places? You don't find this anywhere else in the Code of Jewish Law. It's understandable. If I tell you have to pray and say the silent prayer, the Shemona Esrei, 3 times a day, and you say it backwards, well, of course you'd understand that it doesn't do it. It doesn't accomplish it. You say the Torah backwards, it doesn't do it. So why in these 3 places does it say if you say it backwards, it doesn't count, as if you'd think that maybe you would say it backwards? And why just these 3 places? Right? Why doesn't it say it everywhere else? Because it certainly applies in many places. So let's look at these 3, and then it'll give us a very interesting message about the holiday of Purim. And let's start first with the Shema. So if you look at the Shema in the Siddur, Shema has, as we said, 3 paragraphs. Right? It begins with Shema Yisrael, and it says, B'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, you will love the Lord your God with all your soul, all your might, all of your heart. So it begins in such a way that the Gemara says that what you're doing is you're accepting upon yourself what's called Ol Malchus Shamayim. That is, you're accepting upon yourself that there's the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. What does that mean? It means that you're responsible to God. When you say Shema, you're saying there's one God, and that God expects something from me. He doesn't just say, one God and it's whatever you want. God says, I expect certain things from you. And that's called the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. That God says, I'm your king, and I'm telling you this is what you have to do. That's like, the government of Canada says you have to pay taxes, so you have to pay taxes. So here, the God says you have to do the following things. We call them mitzvot. You have to do it. So that's paragraph number 1. Paragraph number 2 begins, V'haya im shmoa. If you will listen to my words and you will do as I tell you, then the following will happen. What is that? So the Gemara calls that to be makabel ol mitzvahs, that you accept upon yourself not only that there's a God, which was in the first paragraph, and that there's one God, but you're now accepting upon yourself that that God expects you to do specific mitzvahs, specific commandments that he tells you what they are. We know that in the sum total of the Jewish people, it's 613 mitzvahs, of which each one of us has a certain number we have to do. None of us have to do all 613. Some are just for Kohanim, some are just for men, some are just for women, some are only under certain circumstances, like there's a mitzvah to give a get if you get divorced. There's no mitzvah to get divorced. You're not supposed to get divorced. Right? If you get married, there's a mitzvah how to get married. So each mitzvah, right, there are many mitzvahs, but God expects you to do these particular mitzvahs. So first you have to acknowledge there's one God. That's paragraph 1. Then the second one is you have to acknowledge that he expects something from you with particular mitzvahs. Then you have the third paragraph, which is V'yomer V'yadaber Hashem al Moshe Lemor, and it says, right, and it talks about the mitzvah of tzitzis. And it talks about the mitzvah of remembering the going out of Egypt, right? And in that third paragraph, you are fulfilling the mitzvah of remembering the going out of Egypt. There is an actual mitzvah in the Torah that you should remember that God took you out of Egypt. So when you say those words twice a day in the Shema, you are remembering that God took you out of Egypt. So therefore, let's look at what we've done in the Shema. We've had 3 paragraphs. Paragraph 1 is you believe there's a God. Paragraph 2 is you accept upon yourself that God expects you to do particular commandments, particular mitzvahs. And number 3 is you do one of them. Now, let's say you did it out of order. So first you do a mitzvah, but you have no idea what that mitzvah is, where it comes from, or who's telling you, because it's all by itself. So that's the third paragraph first. Then if you do the second paragraph before the first one, you're accepting upon yourself that you have to do certain commandments, but you don't know who's telling you to, because you haven't accepted upon yourself that there's one God. So it's very logical in the Shema that first you have to say, God is my king, I have to listen to him. Number 2 is, this is what he wants me to do, and number 3 is, I do it. You can't do it before you know what he wants you to do or who wants you to do it. So it's logical when it says in Jewish law that a person has to say the Shema in order to fulfill the mitzvah Shema, because you don't get the message otherwise. Now let's look at the mitzvah of Hallel. Now, Hallel is a series of psalms written by King David of Tehillim, and it is said on special occasions. You say it on a holiday, you say it on Passover, now you say it on special occasions, on Rosh Chodesh, you say it at the Passover Seder, and it says that and the law says if you say it backwards, you haven't said it. So why would that be? Because Hallel is just simply a series of psalms, and these psalms have a message of thanking God for special things, special occasions, for saving us, and so forth, depending on what the occasion is. And that's what Hallel is. So why would it tell you can't say that backwards? So we have a general rule. It's a rule, of course, that the Torah teaches us, but it's also a normative rule of humanity, which is if somebody does something for you, before you ask them to do it again, you show your gratitude for them doing it the first time. Right? I go to my, let's say I go to my father and I say, can I have $10? He gives me $10. So before I go back and ask him for another $10, I first thank him for the first one. So I'd say, I want to thank you very much for the $10 you gave me. Could I have another $10? But if I would go to him and say, can I have $10? And then I'd say, can I have another $10? And I don't show my appreciation for the first one, he might give it to me, but he will be hesitant, because I'm not showing that I appreciate what he does for me, right? The purpose of Hallel is that we celebrate what Hashem has done for us, right? Now, Hallel itself is divided into 2 areas. You have first, the Hallel talks about our thanking Hashem for the creation of the world and the bringing us as the Jewish nation up to the giving of the Torah. So if you look at all of the paragraphs in the first half of the Hallel, it talks about the world being created, it talks about the Jewish nation being created, and it talks about the Jewish nation having a purpose. And it ends. Then you have the second half of the Hallel, right? And that half deals with the coming of the Messiah, the future. So the idea is, the first half of the Hallel is we say to God, thank you for creating the world, creating the Jewish people, and giving us a purpose. So we say, right, we thank him because he did this for us already. Now we're saying, okay, that's very nice that you created the world, you took us out of Egypt, you created the Jewish nation, you gave us the Torah, but we want the Messiah. So of course, before you get the Messiah, before you go to the next step, you have to thank him for what he's done, like I just said. So if you read the Hallel out of order, you are doing exactly right the problem that I said before, which is you're instead of thanking God for what he's done for you, you're asking for more before you thank him for what he's already done. Before you, rather than thanking your father for giving you $10, you ask him for a second $10. And of course, that's not the right way to do it. First you show your appreciation, and then you go and do it again. So this is the order, how it's done. If you read Hallel out of order, you lose that message, and therefore you haven't said Hallel. It's also logical. But what about Megillah? Megillah, you have 10 chapters. Each chapter lays out a piece of the story. Right? But if you go to the last one, so it tells how Mordechai and Esther were rose to a high level within the government, and how they were looked at as such special people because of what happened. The one before talks about how the Jewish people rose up against the nation, or the nation of Persia, with the king's permission, and how Haman was killed, and how all his sons were killed. And you go back to before that, and it talks about how Esther, who spoke to the king, got the king to give permission to the Jews to defend themselves. And you go back to that, and it's a very difficult time, and Haman has convinced the king to kill the Jews. And so you're telling the story out of order, right? Because you're reading it backwards, but it's the story. Right, you're getting the story. You just happen to know that the Jews were saved, and then you know what the problem was. You know who saved them. You know how it was set up, and you know when it begins. Right, rather than in the normal order. Well, you are reading it backwards, but why would reading that backwards make it so as if you didn't read it? Like in the other two, it's logical. In the case of the Shema, you can't do a mitzvah until you know that there's a God. So of course you have to do that in order. And in Hallel, you can't ask God for something until you thank him for what he's done. But in the Megillah, what are you losing? Because we already know that we're still here today, that God saved us, right? That Esther and Mordechai played this amazing, enormous role in doing so. That Haman was the bad guy and that he was killed. We all know that, and you know it even if you read it out of order. And by the time you get from the 10th chapter back to the first chapter, you know the whole story. So what are you missing? That it would say if you read it out of order, you don't know. So here, the answer to this question teaches a very fundamental and important aspect of the holiday of Purim. And this is what it tells us. It teaches us the following: that the holiday of Purim is a holiday that happened at a very specific time in history. If you look, in the Torah, in the prophets, you notice that God does a number of very important miracles for the Jewish people. He takes us out of Egypt, right? He makes the 10 plagues, splits the Red Sea, gives us the Torah, supports us throughout the desert, brings us into the land of Israel, supports us against all the other nations who try to go to war with us, right? On and on and on. There's miracle after miracle after miracle, and these miracles are as clear as the light of day. You could not be at the splitting of the Red Sea and tell me it wasn't a miracle. I mean, you couldn't be at the killing of the firstborn and tell me it's just coincidence. Right, that every Egyptian child would die, but all the Jewish children didn't. Right, you couldn't tell me that the Red Sea split and then closed up exactly when it did, and it was a coincidence. Or that all the Jews stood around the mountain, then God gave them the Torah, just coincidence. It wasn't a miracle. You can't say that. It makes no sense, right? That those miracles were apparent and clear miracles. You have to be able to see them. They're called the Nes Nigla, which means totally revealed miracles. However, we don't see those today. Today, when someone says to you, oh, it was a miracle, it means that they looked at something that happened to them. It was different than how it normally is. and they say it's a miracle. But if they wanted to say it wasn't a miracle, they could probably substantiate it. They could probably prove it. You know, if you imagine somebody is driving their car and they hit ice, and there's a 60-car pileup, and out of the 60 cars, you know, there's everybody is injured, and a lot of people are killed, and you are fine. Right? So you say, you're a religious person, so you realize what this is. You say, this is a miracle. God saved me. Right? But it very well could be that you were in the right place and you got the right car and you hit the ice in the right way, and the car behind you, the guy was a good driver, so he turned his car a little bit, and it wasn't a miracle. So any miracle that happens to us today, you can look and you'll see it's a miracle, but if you want to deny it, you can come up with ways to deny it. Right? That's called a nes nister, a hidden miracle. Right? The difference between both cases are real miracles, and both cases God wants to show that He is moving the laws of nature in order to help us. But in one time it was very apparent, and one time it wasn't. And the main reason for this is that God wants us to have free will. He wants us to choose right from wrong. So if every time we do something, there would be a miracle, and it's very clear, we wouldn't have free will anymore. We would do what God says because we know what's going to happen. Like, I'll give you an example. A guy goes into McDonald's. A Jewish guy goes into McDonald's, and he buys two guys. They buy hamburgers. So they both sit down to eat the hamburgers. The guy number one takes a bite out of the hamburger and swallows it, and he dies. Right? Is guy number two going to eat that hamburger? No, he's not going to eat it, because he knows if I eat that hamburger, I'm going to die. Right? What? Right? Now, another one. Another two guys walk into a shul. They don't go to shul usually, but somebody told them that they should come today. It's their yortzeit, and they bring their tefillin. So they take out their tefillin, they put them on, they pray in the morning service, they take off their tefillin, they're putting it in the bag. There's $1 million in the bag of the first guy. Inside the bag. It wasn't there when he started, it's there now. So the second guy, is he going to put on his tefillin? Sure he's going to. And he's going to expect that there's $1 million in his bag. Both cases are miracles, right? One is a negative, one is a positive. One, somebody did something wrong, and it became very clear that they did something wrong, so they died. So nobody around them who saw that happen is going to do something wrong, because it's very clear. That's an apparent miracle. If a guy goes and puts on his tefillin and he finds $1 million in his tefillin bag after he did it, right, and it becomes apparent that if you put on tefillin you're going to get $1 million, so then everyone will put on tefillin. But no one will do either of those things because they have free will. Right? The first person is not going to eat that hamburger, not because he chooses to do the right thing, he wants to keep kosher. He does it because he doesn't want to die, right on the spot. The other guy who puts on his tefillin doesn't put on his tefillin because it's a mitzvah from God to put on your tefillin. He puts it on because he wants the $1 million. So they don't have a balanced free will. Right? It's not do this or do this. If you choose the right thing, I'll reward you, God says. Now, but you have a temptation to do wrong. A person who knows they're going to get $1 million is not tempted to do wrong. He's only going to do right. A person who knows he'll die if he eats an unkosher hamburger is not going to be tempted to do wrong. He's only going to do what's right. Right? So that's if there was apparent miracles. In the ancient times, apparent miracles did not destroy their free will, because they were able to still have free will to judge right from wrong. And you see it in the Torah. You see the Jews get all these miracles, and then they say to Moshe, what is this? That there's a God? Where is he? Right? We're thirsty. There's nothing to drink. Where's God? There must be no God. You just wanted to kill us in the desert. Right? Moshe's a murderer and wants to kill us all in the desert. So how could they say such a thing? They went through the 10 plagues. They went through the splitting of the Red Sea. Well, because people in those days had the ability to experience amazing miracles, but also to be able to sort of almost rationalize them and explain them away so that they had free will. Today we couldn't do that. Today the miracles would be so shocking that we couldn't do it. Now, there had to be a point in history where it changes from the miracles being clear and open to them no longer being open. And that point in history is the holiday of Purim. That's when it happens. Up until that time, when there was a miracle, it was as clear as their nose on your face. You knew it. If you know that, just like you know that your name, you knew that there was a God. A miracle happened, and nobody could explain it away. Nobody could say, when they saw the splitting of the Red Sea, nobody could say it's just coincidence. But a miracle from the day of Purim on, and when a miracle happened, it was hidden. It was not so apparent. You didn't really see it, and therefore you still had free will to choose right from wrong. Because if you don't have the ability to choose right from wrong, then God asks a question, rightfully so, what's the purpose of being here? If I put you into this world and tell you, don't hurt people, only be nice to people, and then I don't put you with any people, so have you done anything? No, I want you to improve yourself. I want you to test yourself. I want to challenge yourself. Do the right thing. If I don't give you a temptation to do what's wrong, then you're not going to do it. There's no choice to do it right. If I tell you keep kosher and everything's kosher, then how much stress is there on you to keep kosher? Everything's kosher. Right? If I tell you, you have to put on tefillin every day, and every time you put on tefillin there's $1 million, how tempted are you to not put on tefillin? You're not tempted at all. So therefore, God wanted that there should still be that balance between doing right and wrong, so you challenge yourself to do the right thing. When that happens, when we have that ability to make that choice to do right from wrong, right, that could only happen for us if the miracles that happen to us can be explained away. If we could say that wasn't really a miracle. When like you go to a hospital and the doctor says, if that whatever bullet or the cut was 1 millimeter to the left, he'd be dead, right? Or they say, I don't know why he's alive. Everything in medical books says he's dead. He should be dead, but he's alive. It happens, right? They're explaining a miracle, but they don't want to say it's a miracle because it's not definitive. It's not like a prophet came to them and said, this guy is going to have a heart attack, but he's going to be better and he's going to be stronger than ever. Boom. Right? The doctor says that heart attack, he should be dead, but he's not dead. That would be an apparent miracle. But a hidden miracle is the guy has a heart attack, and the doctor can sort of explain it. Well, you know what? These things happen. Some people are different. He has a strong heart. He's got good DNA. He's got good genetics. He was a marathon runner, whatever. Right? They can explain it away. That happened on the day of Purim. And that's exactly the message that Jewish law is teaching us when it says if you read the Megillah backwards, you haven't read the Megillah. Because let's read it forwards and what happens. What basically happens is you have a series of things that go on, and it looks like the Jews are going to be destroyed. Here they are. The Jews have been thrown out of Israel after the destruction of the first temple. They're living in Persia, which is today's Iran, modern-day Iran. They're living in Persia. They're under the rule of the king of Persia, right? Who took over from the king of Babylon. He took over from Nebuchadnezzar, and now you have Achashverosh. He's the head of this superpower. 127 countries it runs, right? It's in charge of the world. Persia was the power of the world in those days, and the Jews are there, and this fellow decides that he hates the Jews. His name is Haman. He wants to kill off all the Jews, but he doesn't have the power to do so. Only the king can do that. So he convinces the king by bribing him. Right now, so now as he's doing this, at the same time, the king decides that he wants his wife to dance in front of his friends, and she doesn't want to do that. She says, "I'm the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. You're not even royalty," she tells her husband. "I'm a princess. You're only a king because you married me. If it wasn't for me, you'd be a nobody. You'd be working in a farm. So I'm not going to go dance in front of your friends. You should do what I tell you to do." So somebody advises them, you can't let a woman do that to you. A woman does that to you, you have to kill her. Otherwise, women all over Iran are going to tell their husbands what to do, and it'll be your fault. So he goes and he kills her. Now, she's the royalty. He just killed his wife. Now he doesn't have a queen. So he has to find a queen, right? And lo and behold, along comes Esther, right? And she becomes the queen. Then Esther happens to have an uncle who's Mordechai, and while this is going on, it happens to be that Mordechai hears that there's going to be an assassination of the king, and he tells the king, and the king is saved, and but the king forgets to reward Mordechai for what he does. And as the story goes on, Esther is now living in the harem in the castle, And Mordecai is sitting outside of the castle, and as he's sitting outside, this Haman character goes by. He wants everyone to bow down to him because he's like a god. He's number 2 in the country. Mordecai won't bow down to him. It makes him mad. He decides he wants to kill off all the Jews because of this, because Mordecai's a Jew, right? At the same time, suddenly the king can't sleep one night, and he decides he's going to look through a history book, and he sees he forgot to reward Mordecai for saving his life. He decides the day before that Haman comes to kill off all the Jews, that he's going to reward Mordecai. And then Haman comes to make his proposition, and Mordecai tells Esther, "You better save the Jews." Right? And on the story goes. It just so happened that Mordecai was in the right place to hear this happen. It just so happened that Haman wanted to kill the Jews at that time. It just so happened that Achashverosh killed off his wife Vashti, coincidentally, and he needed a new queen, and he happened to fall in love with a Jewish one who he didn't know was Jewish, and coincidentally she came and had an uncle who was the head of the Jewish people named Mordecai. Coincidentally, the king forgets to pay him for the debt of saving his life. Coincidentally, he comes right at the right moment to thank him, to tell Mordecai how he appreciates it when Haman is trying to kill off the Jews. Coincidentally, his niece is the queen, and nobody knows this. Coincidentally, this goes on and on and on. It's all coincidence. It's not a miracle. You don't see the name of God one time in the entire book of Megillah. It's not in there. It's all coincidence, happenstance. It just so happened that I went to McDonald's with my friend. He ate a hamburger. It was spoiled. He died. I'm not going to eat that hamburger because I don't want to eat a spoiled one either. Maybe mine's spoiled. That's all. Right? And not because God killed him. It just happened to be. Right? That's what happens in the Megillah. It's just coincidence this happens. Coincidence this happens. It was coincidence. I opened up my tefillin bag after I wore them. There was $1 million in there. Maybe my father put it there before he died. He wanted me to have it. Didn't want to pay taxes on it. Right? So it doesn't mean that everybody's going to find $1 million just because I did. So the next guy behind me who wants to put on his tefillin, he just has no reason to believe he's going to get $1 million. Right? That you can explain it away. Yeah, and the entire story of Purim is coincidence. This just happened to be this way, just happened to be this way. Well, there's so many coincidences going on. All it's saying to you is we have to look at our own lives. In our own lives, we say, "Oh, it just so happened that my car, everybody's sliding into each other, and my car suddenly hits a dry spot and stops." Right? Everybody is getting this sickness. I happen to not been home that day. This plane is right, and we hear this all the time. This plane is going to leave from England and is going to fly to somewhere, and a Palestinian went and put a bomb on it, and this one fellow is going to go on it, and he's never late for his plane. But this time somebody needed his help, and he helped him, and because of it he got late for his plane. He missed his flight. He couldn't get on the plane blew up. Well, he thought, "God, why'd you do that to me? I'm never late for my flights. This time I'm late for my flight and I'm going to miss my business meeting." God, you couldn't have held the plane for a few minutes? Well, God wanted him to be alive. The plane blew up. Just so happened to be that he missed it. Right? And that coincidence, what the Megillah is telling you, right, the story of Purim is telling all of us, is that miracles are hidden today. They're not apparent. So what happens if you read the Megillah backwards? Well, first thing you see very clearly that God saves the Jewish people. And then it tells you how he saved the Jewish people. And what originally seemed to be just circumstance, just to be, by chance that Mordecai was in the right place and the king forgot. Now, by reading it backwards, you see the king remembers on the right day, and what caused him to remember was that Mordecai did this, right? And everything suddenly becomes very apparent. All of the miracles that are hidden in the story of Purim become very clear if you read it backwards. They're not hidden at all. Because what happens when you read the Megillah, everything is hidden. You don't see the hand of God at all until the last chapter. And then you suddenly realize everything up until this point was miraculous. God put Mordecai in the right spot, put Esther in the right spot, caused the king to kill Vashti, caused, as Haman was wanted to kill off the Jews, God wanted to save them. So he made this whole thing happen so that the Jews could be saved from Haman. Right? But in a way that nobody would notice. But if you read it backwards, it's very clear, because you see the ending first. You see God saves the Jews. So everything else that happens is not coincidence. It's God manipulating the situation so it happens. It's the fact that, a certain person's driving their car and everybody else has an accident and you happen to be driving and you hit a dry spot so your car doesn't skid. It could be that the night before, some guy's driving his car and it breaks down in that spot. And as all the snow is coming down in that one spot, there's no snow because his car is hot and it's sitting over that spot. And the next morning he gets towed. Now there's this big accident, your car happens to hit that spot. Right? So that guy the night before is saying, God, what'd you do that to me for? I got stuck all night there in the middle of nowhere. Right? So the answer is, the reason God did that to you is to save the life of the guy who's coming the next day who did it. Just like the guy says, "What, God, why did you make me miss my plane?" When in reality, it was the best thing he could do for him. He saved his life. Otherwise, his wife would be a widow, his children would be orphans. He'd be dead in the ocean. Right? But he missed the plane, so he didn't have his business deal. Right? That is the idea. So when it tells you in each three of these cases that if you do it backwards, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah, each one teaches you a different message. But probably the loudest of the messages, the clearest of the messages, is the one in the Megillah, the one in the story of Purim. And this is really one of the most important aspects of the holiday of Purim, is that it tells all of the Jews of the world from that date onward till today, you're going to have miracles happen to you all the time, but you're only going to see them if you look for them. You're only going to see them in a very special way. You know, there's a place in the Torah, we've talked about it when we got there, and it says that Moshe, he gets the Torah from God, right? And he sees what God says, and he sees how great it is to have the Torah and how the Jewish people are going to bring the world to completion. And then it says he has a dream, the Medrash says. And in the dream, he sees Rabbi Akiva, the great rabbi, 1,000 years in the future. And he sees a class that he's teaching, and it's brilliant. And then he has another dream, and he sees the Romans torturing Rabbi Akiva to death. And Moshe wakes up and he says to God, "Is this the reward that you give to the great righteous people? This is the reward? They should be tortured to death?" So God says, "No man can understand my ways. You can't understand me." So what does that mean? So Moshe says, "Show me your ways. I want to understand you." So God says, again, no man can see me and live. No man can understand me, really. So he says, however, I will do this for you, Moshe. He says, go up on that mountain, and in that mountain there's a path. And on that path there's a crevice in the rocks where you're just off the path. So go up on that path, and when you get to that crevice, go into the crevice, right? And I'm going to run by you, and you're going to come out and you're going to look at me, and now you'll see me. You'll right? Because Moses says, I want to see you. Now you'll see me. Now you'll understand what I do. So Moses says, okay. So he goes up on the mountain. He goes into the crevice. It says that God runs by him, but he goes so fast that Moshe just sees a movement. So he comes out of the crevice and he looks and he sees God up ahead, and he sees the back of God's head, and he sees he's wearing the knot on his tefillin, right? God's wearing tefillin, it says. And that's the end of it. So of course we know, just to repeat it, that this is not a true story. This is not literally true. There's a true message here, but God cannot be seen, and God is not a human, and he doesn't physically have a head. He doesn't physically have tefillin. But this is a metaphor, an allegory. It's to teach us something. What is it teaching us? Moshe had this dream, and he saw what happened to Rabbi Akiva, right? So he says, God, show me your ways. Tell me, why do these things happen? How do you allow this? And he says, no man can understand me. He says, but there's one thing, I'll give you a gift, and I'll give this to all the human beings. You'll have the ability to see me, to understand me with hindsight. If something happens now, you're not going to know why it happens. But if you look back at it, you will. It's like if you're watching a football game, right? You know, on Monday morning, everybody knows more about football than the quarterback did. The quarterback should have done this, he should have done that, he should have passed, he should have run, right? Why? It's called a Monday morning quarterback. That means that you have hindsight. You see how the other team reacted, what happened, but the quarterback doesn't see that. It hasn't happened yet, right? So you have a benefit. You can look back. He can't look back. It hasn't happened yet. So God says to Moshe, you won't have the ability to understand me when it's happening, but if you look back in history, you'll see me doing things. You'll see it happen. So that's what happens with us. So that when something happens, like people ask all the time, why did the Holocaust happen? Right? There's a reason. There's probably many reasons. I don't know them. I don't think anyone knows them. But there is a reason. And the reason that nobody knows it is that it's just too recent. It just happened. It's not too far enough back in history. We don't have hindsight for it. If you ask me why the second temple was destroyed, I can tell you. And I can tell you the first temple was destroyed. And the first temple, it said, and I don't mean poetically, it said this in a history book, that the blood of the people ran down the streets of Jerusalem like a river. So you can imagine how many people were killed, right? If you've ever been in Jerusalem, you know the streets in the old city are sort of curved. And in the center of the street, they have a ridge. So when it rains, the water goes into the ridge, so you can walk on the street. Because they didn't have underground sewers like the same way we do. They had these ridges in the road so that the rain would go and you could walk on the street without getting wet. Right? Your feet wouldn't be in a puddle. So those ridges were filled with blood moving like water, like rain coming down. That's how bad it was. Right? So if you'd ask someone then, why are the Jews being killed like that? Their blood is like pouring out. Thousands and thousands of people. We don't know. We don't know why. But I can tell you why. Because we have thousands of years of hindsight. So the Talmud tells us the first temple was destroyed because the Jews were involved with idol worship, murder, and illicit acts of intimacy. The second temple was destroyed because Jews fought with each other. But those days they couldn't see it. They had to have hindsight. I can see it. They couldn't see it. We can't see the Holocaust because it's recent. It's in the past. In the past, in 500 years, maybe we'll know why the Holocaust happened and be able to do something about it. But we don't have the ability without hindsight. Only hindsight. That's what Moshe is saying. That's what the Megillah teaches us. You only know that God saved the Jews after it happened. By looking back on it, when we read the Megillah. But if you read the Megillah backwards, then it's a very apparent miracle. It's not a hidden miracle. Because you first know God saves the Jews, and then it just shows you how. That if you read it in order, this happens and this happens, this happens. Who cares that Mordecai's sitting outside the king's place and he happens to hear these two guys want to kill the king, right? What's they got to do with anything? And then who cares that the king decides he wants Vashti to dance and she won't do it, so he kills her, and he has to get a new queen? Who cares? We're a bunch of Jews. What do we care about the king's? Do we really care who the princess is and the queen is and all this? Then do what you want to do. Right? What do we care? Right, that the king forgot to reward Mordecai. What do we care? The king can't sleep one night. Right? The fact is, if we know the end of the story, which is God caused all of these things to happen, like the guy whose car broke down and had to spend the night in his car, or the guy who missed the plane, he caused all of these things to happen so that in the end he could save the Jews. Right? Then it becomes very clear. So the Purim story and the Megillah is telling you, from now on, including today, miracles are not clear. You're only going to see a miracle if you look for it. But it's not going to hit you in the face. Because you need to have the ability to choose to do right and wrong. And if every time something happens, you see the miracle, you're only going to do what benefits you. You're not going to choose anymore. So from that point on, that's how we've lived. And that's how we see things, yes?
Rabbi, you talked about the first temple, the second temple. It's sort of sounding like Hashem is teaching us, that he has to kill, like his only option is to kill all the Jewish people and wipe them out.
Well, we wouldn't be here if that was true. Right? He didn't wipe us out.
So many people, like, is that, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it looks pretty...
It seems that like, first thing is that when... That God
that people are evil in the world, and we should kill them too, right? Isn't it?
Well, people... When God does these things, he's doing it in a just way. I can't explain any individual situation or even general situations myself. But the Talmud tells us that God actually took out his anger for the Jews giving up on their part of the arrangement of being Jews keeping the Torah on his own house, on the temple. He destroyed the temple, and he banished most of the Jews. The fact that many Jews were killed also happened, but many, many, many Jews were not killed, and many of them were banished. Now, not necessarily were their lives very good; they were slaves. Right, it took a long time for people to be free again, but it was the result of these actions. So and if you notice, since it's not something that happens every day, right? It's not like God is out to kill us. God wants us to do what's right. Only when it gets to the point where that is the best he can do for us because of our actions, that happens. Right? Otherwise, there are many other things that he does rather than something like that. Right? It's always in such a situation. So, but that's a talk of its own. But in this specific case, what's important that we learn from the story of Purim is that it is the time when we get to the point where our miracles are hidden. And it's even more so. There are many of the things we do on Purim. Like, for instance, people wear costumes on Purim. Like, you say, you have no other day that you do that. Like, what other day that we wear costumes? And we act crazy and absurd. People are usually very serious and very, very quiet, become very loud and funny, because we're showing the reverse. We're doing everything backwards. In other words, the whole idea of Purim, and it says in the Megillah, is v'nehapachu, which means backwards. Everything is backwards. What seems the nation which was so strong, the Persians, right? You imagine if you want to draw a correlation between the Persians, right, 127 nations going to war against the Jews, and the Jews winning, is like the United States going to war against the Chartered Accountants of Ontario, and the Chartered Accountants of Ontario win. That's what it's like. Right? You can imagine the most powerful nation in the world went to war with a small group of people who were scattered throughout all of those nations, and the small group won. And that's a miracle. Right? That's miraculous that they won. That concept is bad. It goes against nature. Nature is survival of the fittest. It's the strongest, the biggest, right? They're the ones who are going to always win. You can't go to war against a big country and win. It just doesn't work, unless God wants you to. So the whole idea is just like the Megillah shows how God is hidden in nature and God's miracles are hidden within the world, so too we hide our real selves. We put on costumes. We act different than we usually do. We it might be quiet and serious, and this day we're funny and crazy. We do things that express this feeling, right? This openness. For instance, one of the things is that people drink on Purim. Perhaps they overdo it, but you're supposed to drink to the point of some inebriation, some drunkenness, not to the point of sickness, but to some amount. Why is that? Because you lose your inhibitions and you become open. Right? Usually you're closed and hidden, you suddenly become open. Right? It's the idea of Purim. It's the reverse, right? Up until now, all the miracles were apparent and open. Now they're becoming hidden, and everything's backwards. We find out that in reality, it's not nature that runs the world; it's God who runs the world. Right? So too, we think, right? Who are we? Just a little tiny nation of the world. Right? We have God on our side. We can do everything. Who am I as an individual? Right? I expose who I am. I'm open on Purim. I'm more free. Right? I don't have the inhibitions that I have. I'll say things that I might not normally say. That's why you shouldn't drink too much, because then you'll be foolish. But I mean to the point where you are more open and you're more fun. All those concepts on Purim, I like that. And then the second aspect of Purim that's important, that ties into this, is that it ties in the idea that we are united, that we have to fix the flaws that caused the holiday. What were the flaws? So Haman says it. When Haman goes to Ahasuerus, she says to him, I want that we should destroy this nation. This is a nation that is split up and separated through your entire kingdom. Right? In other words, there's 127 countries. Right? He had Ethiopia, he had Turkey, he had Iran. All of these countries were his. Right? In each one of the countries, there's some Jews. They're split up and separated throughout the world. It's like everywhere else. You go to Ethiopia, it's Ethiopians. Go to Turkey, it's Turks. You go to Iran, it's Iranians. But in every one of those countries, there's Jews. Right? So that's what he says. But really, what is it saying? Like, what's the deeper meaning? Is that there's this nation that are all split up and fighting with each other. They're all over the place. Right? And you have them in every country. So Haman's telling him that one of the problems, you know what causes that I have the power to kill the Jews? Because the Jews fight with themselves. Right? That's the hidden meaning. Haman didn't necessarily know that, but that's what his words are telling us. So we know this. So what do we do on Purim to fix that? It says we make sure that you don't celebrate Purim unless everyone celebrates Purim. Right? It's not. The Rambam says that when it comes to a Jewish holiday, that if you don't make sure that poor people can celebrate the holiday, then when you celebrate the holiday, you're not celebrating the holiday. You're just eating. That's just filling your stomach. That's what he says. He says if you don't have poor people at your table, then you're just filling your stomach. The idea is on Purim, we give money. On Purim, as part of the mitzvah, you're required to give money, the cost of 2 meals, one to each of 2 people, so that they can eat. People who are poor, right? So we do that. It's called matanas avionim. Like I collect every year money for poor people who are in the neighborhood, and on Purim I give that money out so those people can do what they need to do. Right? And everybody contributes to it. It's part of. You have not celebrated Purim correctly unless you've done that. That's important. That's one of them. The second thing is called Shalach Manos. Everyone knows this one. This is where you give food to your friends. So why? Your friends have food, otherwise you'd be giving them money. Right? Why are you giving them food? Because we want people to like each other, to do nice things for each other, because it's a nation that fights with themselves. So here, go out to people and give to them, and not just your friends. You know somebody who nobody gives to? Give them one. You have somebody that, you live on a street and everybody's friendly with each other. Like say, very often people live in a street are usually similar age, their kids are the similar ages. You got one old man there, whatever reason he bought a house on your street. Nobody sees him. He doesn't bother anyone. That's right, a Jewish guy. So you give him one. It can cause love among people. He should feel they remembered me. They think of me too. I'm a part of all this. It causes the Jews to get along. So that we have a mitzvah. You have to give a thing of food to two different people. And each thing of food has to have two types of food in it. You can give beer and pizza if you want. You can give chicken and rice. Whatever it is you want to give, you can give. You can give a chocolate bar and a can of soda. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. It doesn't have to be a big deal. You can give a package of M&Ms and a container of milk. Whatever, two things. Most people will go out of their way and make something funny, make something pretty, and they'll deliver it to different people, so everybody should have something. That's the way that we've always done it. That's an important part of how the holiday does this, and in order to cause love from one Jew to another, so that we should all feel this feeling right towards each other. So the mitzvahs of Purim are firstly to hear the Megillah, so you get the message. The miracles are now going to be hidden, and then you have the message of giving money to the poor, so that they should be able to celebrate also, so that we reunite with each other. And you also give gifts to each other so that everybody unites with each other. And then we have the last one is the meal. You're supposed to have a special Purim meal, just like you have a special meal on Shabbos and Passover. You have a Purim meal. What differentiates this meal from other holiday meals is that at this meal there's drinking. But like again, sometimes people take this too far. Right? You don't have to get dead drunk. The idea is just to be a little bit different. If you would drink 2 glasses of wine, you'd feel lightheaded. That's what it means. It doesn't mean drink 6 glasses of wine. It doesn't mean if I take 3 shots of whiskey, I feel lightheaded. Right? After a meal, let's say, I don't have to have 10. Right? There's no rule to have 10. 3 is enough. That's the concept here. Just to be a little bit light-headed, a little bit open, a little bit funny. And it says, how much do you drink? It says you drink, it says, till you can't distinguish between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. In other words, very succinctly between good and evil. Because normally we have to see the difference. And this one day, everything is good. Everything appears good. Right? Now, just one last piece that ties into this. We look at the end of the Megillah. There are many things in the Megillah worth talking about, but the last thing in the Megillah on page 1261. This is really the end. We have a general rule in Judaism. It says everything follows the end. The end of something tells you the meaning of everything. So look at the last thing here. Verse 3 in chapter 10, the last line in the Megillah. For Mordechai the Jew was viceroy to King Ahasuerus. Right? Mordechai was now the number 2 man to the king. He was a great man among the Jews. Right? All the Jews thought he was great. And he found favor with the multitude of his brethren. Right? People liked him. He sought the good of his people. Everything he did was for others. Right? And he was concerned from the welfare for all of his posterity. Well, that's a funny word. For all of his children, right? That came from him. In other words, Who was Mordecai? Mordecai was a great man. Why was he great? He got along with everybody. He dedicated his life to others, and he got along with his kids. That's what it says. So you're telling me that the end of the story is that this is how a person should be. In the beginning it says they fought and are separated all over. So now the role model that comes out of the story, Mordecai, he was made the number 2 man in the most powerful nation in the world. And what is special about him? He was respected by everyone. He got along with everyone, and he had a good relationship with his children. And that's the end of it. That's the story of Purim, right? To tell us, because we fought and split up, we had this whole story. You want to know from a role model how we should act? That's how we should act. That's what we should be. That's the story of Purim. So now, as we celebrate Purim this week, right, which you're all welcome to come and be with us, with this as the message that we hear underneath it all. So you come and it's loud and it's crazy and people are not acting like they usually do. It's just a lot of fun. It's a exciting time, and that's really what it's telling us.